They say you never see the end coming until it's already happened. For Marcus Thompson, the end arrived on a Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, dressed as a phone call from his lawyer. Marcus, the SEC has frozen all your accounts. The board voted you out. It's over. Just like that. 30 years of building an empire, gone in a single sentence. Marcus sat in what used to be his corner office on the 45th floor of Thompson Financial Tower, a building that still bore his name but no longer belonged to him. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan stretched out like a gray mirror under October clouds. Below, the city moved on, indifferent to catastrophe. At 56 years old, Marcus had been a billionaire since he was 32. He'd built Thompson Financial from nothing into one of the most successful investment firms in America. $3 billion. That's what Forbes had estimated his net worth at just 6 months ago. Now, thanks to his business partner's fraud that Marcus hadn't caught, thanks to investigations and frozen assets and legal fees that devoured everything, he had approximately $700 in a personal account the lawyers hadn't found yet. The billionaire had lost everything, and nobody was coming to save him. His assistant had stopped answering his calls. His so-called friends had vanished the moment the news broke. His ex-wife had already released a statement to the press distancing herself from him. His adult children had blocked his number. In the span of 6 weeks, Marcus had gone from powerful to pariah, from respected to radioactive. He packed his personal items into a cardboard box someone had left by the door. Photos, awards that meant nothing now. A crystal paperweight his daughter had given him 15 years ago when she still loved him. Everything else, the expensive furniture and art, belonged to the company, belonged to someone else now. Marcus walked out of his office for the last time, carried his box through hallways where people he'd employed for years suddenly became very interested in their computer screens. Nobody met his eyes. Nobody said goodbye. He'd become invisible, a ghost haunting his own former empire. The security guard at the lobby desk, a young man Marcus had never bothered learning the name of, held out his hand without a word. Marcus surrendered his access badge, the physical representation of his identity for 3 decades. The guard dropped it in a drawer with dozens of others, the badges of the forgotten and the fired. Marcus walked out into a cold Chicago afternoon, and for the first time in 30 years, he had absolutely nowhere to go. His penthouse apartment would be seized by week's end. His cars had already been repossessed. His club memberships were canceled. His credit cards were maxed and frozen. $700, a cardboard box, and a crushing realization that he'd spent 30 years building wealth and 0 time building anything that actually mattered. He walked for hours, aimless, the box growing heavier with each block. Evening came early, the way it does in October. Street lights flickered on. The temperature dropped. Marcus's expensive suit, one of 50 he owned, did little against the wind coming off the lake. Around 10 that night, exhausted and desperate, Marcus found himself in a part of Chicago he'd never visited, would never have visited when he was someone important. The buildings here were old, worn down by decades of poverty and neglect. Street lights were broken, garbage collected in corners. This was a Chicago that people like Marcus pretended didn't exist. He saw a church, small and humble, with lights still on inside. A sign out front read, Community Center, all welcome. Below it, handwritten on poster board, free dinner, every night, no questions. Marcus hesitated. He'd never needed charity, never imagined he would. But his stomach hurt with hunger, his feet ached from walking, and he had nowhere else to go. The billionaire who'd lost everything walked up the steps and pushed open the door. Inside, the community center was warm and smelled like soup and coffee. About 30 people sat at long tables, eating from paper plates, talking quietly among themselves. Homeless people, mostly, a few families who looked like they were one paycheck from disaster. Everyone here knew what it meant to struggle, to need help, to be invisible to the world outside. Marcus stood in the doorway, still clutching his box, feeling more out of place than he'd ever felt in his life. His suit was too expensive, his shoes too polished. He didn't belong here, but he also didn't belong anywhere else anymore. "You here for dinner, sweetheart?" Marcus turned to see an old woman, maybe 75, wearing a janitor's uniform and holding a mop. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, with dark skin, white hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Her name tag read Dorothy. Yes, Marcus said, his voice rough. He realized he hadn't spoken to anyone in hours. "Well, you're in the right place," Dorothy said, smiling warmly. "Put that box down over there in the corner. Come get yourself a plate. We got vegetable soup tonight. Made it myself. It's good." She said it with such kindness, such complete lack of judgment, that Marcus felt his throat tighten. When was the last time someone had spoken to him with genuine warmth? When was the last time he'd been seen as human rather than as an asset or a liability? He set his box down where she'd indicated and got in line. The woman serving food, another volunteer, ladled soup into a bowl and handed it to him with a smile. "Help yourself to bread. Coffee's over there." Marcus sat at the end of a table, alone, and ate his first free meal. The soup was simple, just vegetables and broth. But it was hot, and it was food, and he was grateful in a way he'd never been grateful for any of the $1,000 dinners he'd eaten at exclusive restaurants. He watched Dorothy as he ate. She moved through the center with quiet efficiency, wiping down tables, picking up trash, refilling coffee, chatting with people. She knew everyone's name. She asked about their days, their health, their small struggles. She listened when they talked. She laughed at their jokes. She existed fully present with people the rest of the world had forgotten. After dinner, as people began to leave for shelters or wherever they'd sleep that night, Dorothy came over to Marcus's table. She sat down across from him with a tired sigh, her old bones grateful for the rest. "You're new," she said. Not a question, an observation. Marcus nodded. "First time." "That's a nice suit," Dorothy said. "Real nice. Expensive." Marcus looked down at his suit, wrinkled now from a day of walking. It had cost $4,000. He owned 50 like it. They meant nothing now. "It's just a suit." "Nothing is just anything," Dorothy said wisely. "That suit tells a story. Want to tell me what happened?" And Marcus, this man who'd never shared his problems with anyone, who'd always been the one solving everyone else's issues, who built walls around himself so high nobody could see in, started talking. He told Dorothy everything. The business partner's fraud, the SEC investigation, the frozen accounts, the lost fortune, the disappeared friends and family, the complete and total collapse of everything he'd built. Dorothy listened without interrupting, without judging, just being present the way she'd been present for everyone else in center. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands folded on the table. "So you lost your money," Dorothy said finally. "Did you lose yourself?" Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, who are you without the billions? Without the company and the power and all that? Who's Marcus Thompson when all that gets stripped away?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer and realized he had no idea. His entire identity for 30 years had been billionaire, CEO, powerful, successful. Take those things away, and what was left? He didn't know. The question terrified him. "I worked my whole life building that company," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "It was everything. It was all I had. And now it's gone and I'm nothing." Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand in her small, callous ones. "Baby, you were never nothing. You're a human being. You matter because you exist, not because of what you own or what you built. Money and companies, those are just things. They come and go. But you, Marcus Thompson the person, you're still here. Question is, who do you want to be now?" Tears Marcus hadn't let himself cry since this nightmare began suddenly spilled down his cheeks. In a church basement community center, at a worn table, holding the hand of an old janitor who'd shown him more kindness in 10 minutes than anyone had shown him in weeks. Marcus broke. "I don't know who I am," he whispered. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then maybe that's what you're here to learn," Dorothy said gently. "Maybe losing everything was the only way you'd find what really matters. Because I promise you, sweetheart, it ain't money. I've been cleaning floors for 50 years. Never had much, but I got peace. I got purpose. I got people I love and who love me back. That's wealth, real wealth." Over the next 3 months, as lawyers sorted through the wreckage of his financial life, Marcus became a regular at the community center. He started coming not just for meals, but to volunteer. He washed dishes. He served food. He mopped floors alongside Dorothy, learning from her how to see people instead of walking past them. Dorothy taught him names. Tommy, the veteran with PTSD, who needed someone to listen without fixing. Maria, the single mom working 3 jobs who needed help with her kids' homework. James, the alcoholic trying to get sober who needed someone to believe in him. All these people Marcus would have walked past 6 months ago, would never have seen, became real to him. Human, important, and slowly, painfully, Marcus began to understand what Dorothy had been trying to tell him. He'd spent 30 years accumulating wealth and 0 time building character. He climbed to the top of the financial world, but hadn't bothered developing his humanity along the way. He'd been rich but empty, successful but small. One evening, about 4 months after that first night, Marcus and Dorothy sat in the center after everyone had left, drinking coffee and talking the way they did most nights now. Dorothy had become something like a grandmother to him, the only person in his life who seemed to genuinely care whether he lived or died. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Dorothy said, her eyes twinkling. "You remind me of someone I used to know. A young man who came through here about 35 years ago. He was desperate, broke, angry at the world. I gave him dinner, gave him encouragement. He turned his life around, built something big, made a fortune." Marcus smiled. "What happened to him?" "He forgot where he came from," Dorothy said sadly. "Got so wrapped up in making money that he forgot to stay human. Forgot to help others the way he'd been helped. I always hoped he'd remember someday. Hoped he'd come back." Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more closely. "Dorothy, what was his name?" Dorothy pulled a photograph from her pocket, yellowed with age. She slid it across the table. Marcus picked it up, and his breath caught in his chest. The photo showed a young Dorothy, maybe 40 years old, standing in the same community center with her arm around a young man who looked exactly like Marcus had at 21. "That's you," Marcus whispered. "And that's me." "I never forgot you, Marcus," Dorothy said softly. "You came here 35 years ago, desperate and hungry. I fed you. I encouraged you. I told you that you mattered, that you could do great things. And you did. You built an empire. But you forgot the most important thing I taught you, to stay human, to help others, to remember where you came from." Marcus stared at the photograph, memories flooding back that he'd buried deep. He remembered being 21, having dropped out of college because he couldn't afford it, living in his car, coming to this center desperate for food. He remembered an old woman who'd been kind to him, who'd told him he mattered. How had he forgotten? How had he become so focused on building wealth that he'd erased the memory of the kindness that had saved him? "I'm so sorry," Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. I forgot everything that mattered." "You didn't forget," Dorothy said, squeezing his hand. "You just needed to remember. Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what's really valuable. You had to fall all the way down to land back here, where you started, so you could remember who you're supposed to be." 6 months after that first night in the community center, Marcus stood in a small storefront on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't much, just a simple space with tables and chairs, a small kitchen in back, large windows facing the street. But it was his. not built on money or investors or grand ambitions, built on purpose. The sign above the door read, Dorothy's Place, Community Center and Job Training, all welcome. Marcus had used the last of his personal assets and a small loan from a community bank to create this space, a place where people could get meals, yes, but also job training, resume help, interview coaching, a place that treated poverty not as a moral failing, but as a temporary circumstance that could be changed with help and dignity. Dorothy stood beside him at the grand opening, tears in her old eyes. She'd retired from her janitor job and was now the heart and soul of this new center, doing what she'd always done, seeing people and reminding them they mattered. The center filled with people that first day, people Marcus had met over the past 6 months, people who become friends, family, the community he'd never had when he was wealthy and isolated. Tommy was there, sober now for 90 days, working as a security guard at a local school. Maria was there with her kids, having completed job training and gotten hired as a medical assistant. James was there, 2 months sober and volunteering to help others in recovery. And Marcus was there, no longer a billionaire, no longer powerful in the ways the world measured power, but rich in ways he'd never understood before. Rich in purpose, rich in connection, rich in the knowledge that his life mattered not because of what he owned, but because of who he helped. You did good, baby, Dorothy said, squeezing his arm. You remembered. You saved me, Marcus said, twice. Once when I was 21 and didn't know it, and again when I was 56 and needed it desperately. I didn't save you, Dorothy said, smiling. I just reminded you who you were underneath all that money, the person you were always supposed to be. You did the rest. That evening, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up, Marcus found Dorothy standing at the window, looking out at the street. What are you thinking about? Marcus asked. I'm thinking about how funny life is, Dorothy said. You lost everything. Billions of dollars. A company. Power. Everything the world says matters. And you ended up exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do. Makes you wonder if you really lost anything at all. Marcus thought about that. He'd lost money. Yes. Lost status. Lost everything he'd spent 30 years building. But he'd found purpose. Found community. Found himself. Found the person he'd been before ambition and greed and the hunger for more had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. No, Marcus said finally, I didn't lose anything. I found everything. The billionaire lost everything material, but the man gained everything that matters. Sometimes you have to fall to remember how to stand. Dorothy smiled, patting his hand. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who have nothing but give everything. And sometimes an old lady janitor who cleans floors knows more about wealth than all the billionaires on Wall Street. They stood together in the window, watching the city lights come on. Two people who'd save each other in different ways, at different times, proving that kindness wasn't transaction or an investment. It was a foundation of everything worth building. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think we need to find everything we actually need. Sometimes the greatest success comes after the biggest failure. And sometimes the wisdom we need most comes from the people we least expect. Like an old lady janitor who sees the world more clearly than those standing at the top of towers, who understand that the truest measure of a life isn't what we accumulate, but what we give away and who we become in the giving. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. It helps us share more beautiful stories like this one. Kindly drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I like to know what part of the world engages with my story. Oh, also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel Deep Cut Stories for more emotional stories about love, kindness, and fate that'll touch your heart deeply. Thank you for watching.